Hello, it's great to have you here. If you enjoy thrilling romances, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. The wind was a living thing, a predator stalking the Wyoming plains on this Christmas Eve of 1888. It howled a mournful song that promised only desolation, clawing at the canvas cover of Samuel's wagon with icy talons. He pulled his worn coat tighter, the rough wool doing little to fend off the cold that had sunk deep into his bones. Beside him on the driver's bench, 10-year-old Henry sat ramrod straight, his small jaw set with a seriousness that didn't belong on a boy his age. He was trying to be the man of the family, a role thrust upon him too soon. "Are we almost there, Pa?" Henry's voice was steady, but Samuel could hear the tremor beneath it. Samuel squinted into the swirling vortex of white that had once been a clear trail. The world had vanished, replaced by an endless, blinding fury of snow. "We'll be there soon, son. The town of Laramie can't be more than a few more miles. We'll find a warm room, a hot meal. It'll be the best Christmas yet." He said the words, but the hope in them felt as thin as the winter air. He'd made a promise to his late wife, Mary, a promise whispered at her bedside as she'd faded from this world. He would take their children west, away from the crowded city and the sickness that had stolen her from them. He would build them a new life, a real home with his own two hands. He was a carpenter, a good one, and a new town like Laramie always had need of a man who could turn timber into shelter. But now, it was shelter he desperately needed and could not find. Tucked in the back of the wagon, nestled amongst their few worldly possessions, 6-year-old Lucy coughed, a small dry sound that tore at Samuel's heart. He glanced back, seeing only a mound of blankets where his daughter lay. "You all right back there, sweet pea?" "I'm cold, Papa," she whimpered, her voice small and frail. A fresh wave of fear, colder than the wind, washed over him. They had been on the trail for hours, and the storm had descended with a terrifying suddenness. What had begun as a gentle dusting of festive snow had morphed into a full-blown blizzard. The two sturdy horses pulling their wagon strained against the deepening drifts, their breath pluming like smoke in the frigid air. Every gust of wind felt like a physical blow, pushing them, halting them, threatening to swallow them whole. It was then that it happened. Not with a loud crash, but with a sickening, grinding crack that vibrated up through the wagon floor. The vehicle lurched violently to one side, throwing Henry against him. Samuel hauled back on the reins, his own voice a raw shout against the storm. "Whoa! Easy now! Easy!" The horses came to a halt, their sides heaving. The wagon sat at a drunken, impossible angle. Samuel knew before he even jumped down into the knee-deep snow. His heart sank as he confirmed his fears. The right rear wheel had splintered, its thick spokes shattered like kindling. The iron rim was bent and half buried in a snowdrift. It wasn't a simple repair. The axle housing was likely damaged. It would take a forge and tools he did not have. He was a carpenter. He could build a house from the ground up, but he couldn't conjure a new wheel out of a blizzard. Henry was at his side in an instant, his young face pale. "Is it bad, Pa?" Samuel put a hand on his son's shoulder, trying to project a calm he was far from feeling. "Nothing we can't handle, son. Let's get you and your sister out of the wind." He worked with a grim efficiency born of desperation. He unhitched the horses, tethering them to the sheltered side of the broken wagon. Then he pulled his children from their cold refuge, bundling the small, shivering form of Lucy in his arms. She coughed again, a weak, rattling sound that sent a spike of pure terror through him. "We can't stay here, Pa," Henry said, his voice sharp with a dawning understanding of their predicament. "We'll freeze." "I know, son, I know." Samuel scanned the horizon, but there was nothing to see, only white. A world of white. The sun was setting, though he could only tell by the subtle shift from blinding grey to a deeper, more menacing twilight. They were stranded, exposed, with a sick child and no shelter. The promise he'd made to Mary echoed in his mind, a cruel taunt. He had brought them west to build a life, not to let them perish in a snowbank. He gathered his children close, using his own body as a shield against the relentless wind. He wrapped them in every blanket he could pull from the wagon, creating a small human fortress against the storm. Lucy had stopped whimpering and was now frighteningly still in his arms. He could feel the feverish heat of her skin, even through her layers of clothing. "Dear Lord," he whispered, his own breath catching in his throat. "Don't do this. Not now. Please, just show me a way." He prayed with a fervor he hadn't felt in years, his words snatched away by the gale. He held his children, the minutes stretching into an eternity, the cold seeping deeper, stealing his strength. Despair began to settle over him, a heavy, suffocating blanket. This was it. This was how it ended. And then he saw it. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, a cruel mirage conjured by the cold. But he blinked the ice from his eyelashes and looked again. Far off to the north, a pinprick of light flickered in the oppressive gloom. It was small, golden, and steady. A lamp, a candle, a home. Hope, fierce and powerful, surged through him, pushing back the despair. "Henry," he said, his voice cracking. "Look!" Henry's head snapped up, his eyes following his father's pointing finger. "A light! Pa, it's a light!" It was their only chance. It might be miles away, an impossible distance in this storm, but it was better than the certain death of staying put. Samuel made his decision in a heartbeat. He couldn't carry much, only his children. He secured Lucy more firmly in his arms, her small head resting against his shoulder. "Henry, you stay right behind me. Hold on to my coat and don't let go, you understand? No matter what." The boy nodded, his eyes wide but determined. "I understand, Pa." Leaving the wagon, the horses, and everything they owned to the mercy of the storm, Samuel turned his face toward the light and took the first step. It was like wading through molasses. The snow was deep and powdery, stealing his footing with every move. The wind screamed in his ears, trying to turn him back, to force him to his knees. But the light beckoned, a lone star in a universe of white chaos. He lost all track of time. There was only the next step, and the one after that. The burning in his lungs, the ache in his arms from Lucy's weight, the reassuring tug on his coattails from Henry's small gloved hand. He focused on the light, refusing to look away, willing it not to disappear. It was his anchor, his salvation. He stumbled, falling to one knee, the impact jarring a weak cry from Lucy. Henry helped him up, the boy's strength surprising him. "We're getting closer, Pa. I can see it better." He was right. The light was no longer a distant spark, but the distinct warm glow of a window, and beneath it, the dark, solid shape of a structure, a cabin. They had almost made it. Buoyed by a final surge of adrenaline, Samuel pushed forward, his legs screaming in protest. Finally they were there, collapsing against a solid wall of rough-hewn logs that blocked the punishing wind. A curl of grey smoke rose from a stone chimney, a sight more beautiful to Samuel than any cathedral. He could smell the life-giving scent of burning pine. He stumbled towards the door, a simple plank construction, and raised a numb, frozen hand. He knocked, the sound swallowed by the storm. He knocked again, harder, using the last of his strength to bang his fist against the wood. For a long moment, there was nothing. A terrible thought struck him. What if it was empty? What if the lamp was just left burning? Then, he heard the sound of a bar being lifted from inside. The door creaked open a few inches. A sliver of warm, golden light cut through the darkness, illuminating the face of the person who stood before them. It was a woman. Her hair was as black as a raven's wing, braided neatly down her back. Her face, framed by the light, was one of striking angles and quiet strength, her skin the color of warm copper. But it was her eyes that held him. Dark and intelligent, they were filled with a deep, profound wariness as they swept over him, a white man appearing out of the heart of a blizzard. Her hand rested near her waist, and he saw the glint of a sheathed knife. Samuel's voice was a ragged croak. "Please, ma'am, my children, the storm, our wagon broke." The woman's gaze was hard, untrusting. This was her land, her home, and he was an intruder. But then her eyes dropped from his desperate face to the small, bundled form in his arms. She saw Lucy's pale face, the blue tint to her lips. Her gaze shifted to Henry, who stood shivering behind his father, trying his best to look brave. The hardness in her eyes did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of compassion. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Without a word, she pulled the door wide open, stepping back into the warmth and holding it for them. "Get them inside," she said, her voice low and steady. Quickly, the transition from the world of ice to the world of warmth was so abrupt it was dizzying. As the heavy plank door closed, it sealed off the blizzard's roar, replacing it with the gentle crackle of a well-tended fire. The air inside the cabin was thick with the scent of pine smoke, drying herbs, and something savory simmering in a pot over the hearth. For a moment, Samuel could do nothing but stand there, dripping melted snow onto the packed earth floor, the life-giving heat soaking into his frozen limbs. Lucy, a dead weight in his arms, stirred with a faint moan. From a chair carved from a single piece of wood near the fire, An old man rose. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of deep lines, each one telling a story Samuel could never hope to read. His long grey hair was bound in 2 braids, and his dark eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharp, assessing intelligence. He looked from Samuel to the children, his expression unreadable. "Onakona," the woman said, her voice soft but carrying authority. "They are caught in the storm. The little one is sick." She turned her attention back to Samuel, her gaze direct. "Bring them to the fire. Get their wet things off them now before the cold sickness takes root." It was an order, not a suggestion, and Samuel obeyed without hesitation. He gently laid Lucy down on a thick bison hide spread before the hearth, her small body looking fragile and lost in the vastness of the fur. Henry stood rigidly beside her, his protector's stance unwavering as he watched the woman, Morning Star, and the old man, Onakona, with undisguised suspicion. "It's all right, son," Samuel said, his voice low as he began to unbutton Henry's soaked coat. "We're safe here." Henry's eyes, so like his mother's, darted from the woman to the strange herbs hanging from the rafters, to the intricate patterns painted on stretched hides that adorned the walls. This was a world utterly alien to him, and his fear was palpable. Morning Star seemed to understand. She knelt, not near Henry, but by the fire, adding a log from a neatly stacked pile. She didn't look at the boy, giving him space, her movements calm and deliberate. Then she turned her attention to Lucy. Her hands, surprisingly gentle, brushed the damp hair from the little girl's forehead. "She burns with fever," Morning Star stated, her dark eyes meeting Samuel's. He saw not accusation but a simple statement of fact. She moved to the simmering pot and ladled a steaming, fragrant broth into a clay bowl. Onakona, meanwhile, had retrieved a stack of thick wool blankets, woven with geometric patterns of red and black. Samuel worked quickly, stripping off his children's wet outer layers, chafing their hands and feet to bring life back to them. He wrapped them in the warm, dry blankets the old man provided. When he was done, Morning Star approached, holding the bowl of broth. Henry flinched back, pulling his blanket tighter. "I don't want it," he muttered, his voice defiant. Samuel was about to reprimand him when Morning Star simply placed the bowl on the hearth. "It will be here when you are hungry," she said, her voice even. She then dipped a soft cloth into a basin of cool water and began to bathe Lucy's face. Under her tender care, Lucy's shivering subsided, and she leaned into the touch, a small sigh escaping her lips. The sight was enough to disarm Henry's hostility, if only slightly. He watched, his suspicion warring with a grudging respect for the care being shown to his sister. Samuel, having shed his own frozen coat, finally sat back on his heels, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He watched Morning Star minister to his daughter, her focus absolute. He had expected fear or anger at their intrusion, but instead he found a quiet, powerful competence. This woman was a survivor, at home in this wilderness that had nearly claimed him and his family. The cabin, though simple, was a testament to that. It was meticulously clean, every item having its place. Tools were sharp, supplies were neatly stored. It was a home built not just of logs, but of resilience. Onakona handed him a bowl of the same steaming liquid. It was an herbal stew, rich with the taste of root vegetables and some kind of wild game. It was unlike anything Samuel had ever eaten, but it was hot and nourishing, and with every spoonful, he felt strength returning to his body. He made sure Henry ate as well, and the boy, seeing his father's example and driven by a hunger he could no longer deny, finally relented. The blizzard continued its assault on the small cabin, but inside, a fragile peace had settled. The children, warmed and fed, eventually drifted to sleep on the bison hide, their small chests rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The only sounds were the fire's hiss and the wind's lonely howl. Samuel looked at his hosts, who sat on the other side of the hearth, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. The silence felt heavy, full of unspoken questions. I don't know how to thank you," Samuel began, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved us. You saved my children." Morning Star nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire. "The Great Spirit does not guide a traveler through a storm, only to see them perish at the door," Onakona added, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The storm does not care if a man's skin is red or white. It is a fool who denies shelter to any creature in such a night." Samuel felt the truth of their words deep in his soul. "My name is Samuel," he offered. "This is my son, Henry, and my daughter, Lucy. I am Morning Star. This is my grandfather, Onakona." There was another long silence. Samuel felt the need to explain his presence, to bridge the chasm of culture and experience that separated them. "We were headed for Laramie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a carpenter. My wife, Mary, she passed on from consumption back east. I promised her I'd bring the children out here, build them a better life, a real home." He swallowed, the grief still a raw, open wound. "I was beginning to think I'd broken that promise tonight." Morningstar's expression softened. For the first time, she looked at him, not as an intruder or a threat, but as a man, a father. "A promise to a loved one is a sacred thing," she said quietly. "It is a strong rope to hold on to when the trail is dark." He looked around the cabin again, at the self-sufficiency evident in every corner. "You live here, alone, so far from any town?" It was Onakona who answered, his old eyes seeming to look through Samuel into the past. "We once lived among our people, but the agents on the reservation count us like cattle and feed us lies. The towns of the white man build walls of wood, but also walls of the heart. Here," he gestured to the room, "the sky is our roof, and the land is our church. We are not alone. We are home." Morningstar's eyes met Samuel's, and in their depths, he saw a history of pain and pride. "My grandfather teaches me the old ways," she explained, "the knowledge of the earth, the healing plants. It is a knowledge your people have forgotten, or perhaps never knew. We choose this life because it is the only one where we can still be who we are." Samuel listened, a sense of shame creeping over him. He had always thought of this land as empty, a wilderness to be tamed and built upon. He had never considered the people who saw it not as empty, but as full, not as a wilderness, but as a home. The blizzard that had been his enemy had, for them, been just another part of a world they understood and respected. It had forced him inside these walls, but it was also forcing him to see beyond the walls he had built in his own mind. He looked at Morningstar, at the elegant line of her jaw in the firelight, the quiet strength in her posture. A deep, profound gratitude bloomed in his chest, but it was tangled with something else now, admiration, a nascent respect for her world, for the quiet dignity with which she lived. The ice of his preconceived notions, frozen hard by years of stories and ignorance, was beginning to thaw in the unexpected warmth of this small, isolated cabin. Outside, the wind howled on, but inside, the world was shrinking to this single, quiet room, and a connection, as fragile and powerful as a new spring shoot, was beginning to grow in the stillness. Samuel awoke on Christmas morning to a world that was strangely silent, yet full of sound. The wind no longer shrieked like a banshee, but had settled into a steady, mournful moan, a constant pressure against the cabin's sturdy walls. The fire had been banked and was now a bed of glowing orange coals, tended to by Morningstar, who moved with a silent grace that made her seem a part of the dawn itself. She was humming, a low melodic tune that held a note of ancient sorrow and enduring strength. Outside, the snow was still falling, thick and relentless, sealing them in, creating an island of existence in a sea of white. He sat up, the buffalo hide warm around him. Across the hearth, Henry and Lucy were still asleep, huddled together like a pair of hibernating cubs. A pang of love, sharp and fierce, went through him. For them, this was supposed to be a day of wonder and excitement. Instead, they were trapped, refugees in a stranger's home. The guilt was a heavy weight in his gut. Morningstar seemed to sense his thoughts. She turned from the fire, a steaming mug carved from burlwood in her hands. "It is a day of peace," she said, her voice soft in the quiet of the morning. "Even when the world outside is at war with itself." She offered him the mug. It was a tea of some kind, fragrant with pine and mint, and it warmed him from the inside out. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for everything." Later, after a breakfast of dried venison and gritty but nourishing corn cakes, the children awoke. Lucy's cough was still present, a small dry tickle, but her spirits were bright. She looked around the cabin with wide, curious eyes, her earlier fear forgotten. Henry, however, remained a stoic little shadow at his father's side. Samuel knew he had to do something. He couldn't let the day pass unmarked. Rummaging through his carpenter's satchel, one of the few things he'd managed to haul from the wagon, he found his whittling knife and a small block of pine he kept for repairs. He sat by the fire, the wood in his hands feeling familiar and comforting. "What are you making, Pa?" Henry asked, peering over his shoulder. "Just a little Christmas magic," Samuel replied, a faint smile touching his lips. His hands, though stiff from the cold, moved with an old, practiced skill. Under the watchful eyes of his children and their hosts, the block of wood began to transform. Shavings fell away like snowflakes, revealing the graceful shape of a doe, its head tilted as if listening. He worked with intense focus, pouring all his love and worry into the simple carving. When he was done, he smoothed the edges and handed it to Henry. The boy took it, his fingers tracing the delicate lines. A rare, genuine smile lit up his face. "It's beautiful, Pa." For Lucy, he carved a smaller, simpler shape, a tiny bird, its wings half spread as if about to take flight. She gasped with delight, clutching it in her small hand as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. As the children played with their new toys, Morning Star spoke. "You have a gift," she said to Samuel, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You make the wood remember the life it once held." "It's just something to pass the time," he said, though her words warmed him. "A gift is never just something," Onakona rumbled from his chair. "It is the spirit showing its face through a man's hands." Morning Star then offered a gift of her own. She gathered the children close, her voice dropping into a rhythmic storytelling cadence. She told them a Lakota legend of the winter, of how the north wind was a great grumpy bear, and how a clever little snowshoe hare had tricked him into softening his breath long enough for the people to gather their firewood. The children were captivated, lost in a world of talking animals and spirits of the plains. Samuel watched, a strange feeling taking root in his chest. He saw the way Morning Star's face softened as she spoke to his children, the way Lucy leaned against her, completely trusting. He saw the way Henry, despite his best efforts to remain aloof, was leaning in, his eyes wide with fascination. In this small, smoke-filled cabin, two different worlds were meeting, not in conflict, but in the shared, simple joy of a story. The attraction he felt for Morning Star deepened, becoming something more than gratitude or admiration. It was a recognition of a kindred spirit, a woman whose strength was matched only by her capacity for gentleness. He felt a pull towards her that was as undeniable as the force of the storm outside. The peace of the moment was shattered by a single, harsh sound, a cough from Lucy, but this one was different. It was a deep, wet, rattling sound that seemed to tear through her small body. She gasped for breath, her face suddenly pale and clammy. Samuel was at her side in an instant, his heart seizing in his chest. He pressed his hand to her forehead. It was burning. The fever that had been a low ember the night before was now a raging fire. "Lucy, sweet pea, look at me." Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. She began to shiver violently, though her skin was hot to the touch. Another racking cough shook her, and this time she whimpered, a thin, pained cry. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped Samuel. This was how it had started with Mary. A cough, a fever, the slow, inexorable decline. The doctor in their town back east had been helpless. Here, in the middle of a blizzard, miles from any town, what hope did they have? He felt the cabin walls closing in, the wind's moan mocking his powerlessness. "We have to do something," he said, his voice ragged, looking from Morning Star to Onakona. "We have to get her to a doctor." "There is no doctor to be reached," Morning Star said, her voice calm but urgent, cutting through his panic. She knelt beside Lucy, her hands moving with professional certainty, feeling the child's pulse, listening to her breathing. "The sickness is in her chest. It fills her with fire and water. We must cool the fire and draw out the water, or the spirit will leave the body to find peace." Samuel stared at her, his mind reeling. "What are you talking about? She needs medicine. A doctor." "I have medicine," she said, her dark eyes locking with his. They were steady, confident, and held not a trace of doubt. "My grandmother taught me. Her grandmother taught her. It is the old knowledge." She rose and went to a dark corner of the cabin, retrieving a worn leather pouch. From it, she took several dried herbs, roots, and something that looked like tree bark. The scent that filled the air as she began to grind them with a stone pestle was pungent and earthy, completely alien to him. Onakona watched her, his expression serene, offering a silent nod of encouragement. Samuel's mind was a battlefield. Every instinct screamed at him to trust what he knew, to trust the world of doctors and modern medicine, flawed as it was. He was a man of logic, of straight lines and solid construction. This was magic, potions, things he'd only heard of in fearful, dismissive whispers. What if it was poison? What if it made her worse? The thought was unbearable. But then he looked at Lucy. Her breaths were coming in shallow, rapid gasps. A faint blue tinge was appearing around her lips again, a terrifying sign that her lungs were failing. The storm was an impassable wall. There was no doctor. There was no one else. Doing nothing was a certain death sentence. He looked back at Morning Star. She worked without hesitation, her focus absolute. She was not a mystic chanting incantations. She was a healer at her craft. He remembered the sureness of her hands on Lucy's forehead, the competence in every line of her body. He remembered her words. The Great Spirit does not guide a traveler through a storm, only to see them perish at the door. Was this a test? A test of him? Morning Star finished her preparations, mixing the ground herbs with hot water to create a dark, thick tea. She brought the steaming cup over. She did not try to force it, did not command him. She simply held it out, her gaze meeting his, and waited. The entire world seemed to shrink to the space between them. In her eyes, he saw not a challenge, but an offer, a lifeline. In that moment, Samuel had to choose. He could cling to the wreckage of his own world's knowledge, or he could reach for the hand offered by this one. He looked at his daughter, his beautiful, fading Lucy, and knew there was no choice at all. His world had failed him before. It had failed Mary. With a trembling hand, he reached out and took the cup from her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a raw whisper, an act of pure, desperate faith. Help her. The hours that followed were a waking dream. A long, tense vigil played out against the symphony of the storm. Time ceased to have meaning, marked only by the rise and fall of Lucy's chest and the crackle of the fire. Samuel held his daughter, propping her up with blankets, while Morning Star administered the medicine. She worked with a quiet, tireless devotion, using a soft cloth to coax small sips of the dark herbal tea past Lucy's lips. She bathed the child's feverish skin with cool water, murmuring soft words in the Lakota tongue, sounds that were less like language and more like a gentle, flowing river. Samuel watched, his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. He felt useless, a large, clumsy man whose only skill was with wood and nails, things that were utterly worthless in this fight. All he could do was hold his daughter, whisper her name, and pour all of his hope and fear into a silent, desperate prayer. He placed his trust, the most precious thing he had, into the hands of this woman he had met less than a day ago. Onakona sat in his chair, a silent, steady presence in the corner. He did not interfere, but his watchful eyes never left them, offering a grounding force in the swirling chaos of Samuel's emotions. Henry, refusing to sleep, sat huddled at his father's feet, his hand resting on Samuel's boot, a small soldier standing guard over his sister. Sometime in the deepest, darkest part of the night, when the world felt ancient and the fire burned low, something shifted. Samuel felt it first. The violent shivering that had racked Lucy's body began to subside. The heat radiating from her skin, a dry, scorching heat that had terrified him, lessened its intensity. He looked at Morning Star, his eyes wide with a question he dared not speak aloud. She pressed the back of her hand against Lucy's forehead, then her cheek. She held it there for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at Samuel, and in the depths of her dark eyes he saw a flicker of relief. "The fire cools," she whispered. "The battle is turning." A wave of emotion so powerful it almost brought him to his knees, washed over Samuel. It was not yet victory, but it was hope, true, tangible hope. He watched as Lucy's breathing, once so shallow and ragged, began to deepen, to even out. The frightening gasps were replaced by a steady, more peaceful rhythm. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on her brow. The fever was breaking. The medicine, the old knowledge, was working. He looked at Morning Star, who was now gently wiping the sweat from Lucy's face. He saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, but also the deep, unwavering focus. He saw not just a healer, but a protector. In that moment, his overwhelming gratitude fused with the admiration he already felt, and it ignited into something new, something profound and undeniable. It was a feeling he thought had been buried forever with Mary. It was love. Not a desperate, grasping love, but a quiet, powerful recognition of a soul whose strength and compassion mirrored the deepest longings of his own. He didn't know when he had reached out, but his hand was covering hers where it rested on Lucy's blanket. It was a simple touch, but it was charged with all the unspoken fear, hope, and dawning affection of the past hours. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled slightly, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them, more intimate than any words. Toward dawn, Lucy's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer glassy and unfocused, but clear. She looked at her father, then at the woman beside him. A small, weak smile touched her lips. "Papa," she whispered, her voice a tiny thread of sound. Tears welled in Samuel's eyes, hot and unrestrained. He couldn't speak, could only nod, stroking her hair. "I'm here, sweet pea, I'm right here." When the first rays of the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, they revealed a world transformed. The blizzard had passed. The wind was gone. A profound, sacred silence had fallen over the land, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the cabin's eaves. The sun's light streamed through the single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a golden glow over the scene within. It was the morning after the storm in every sense. The world outside was a breathtaking spectacle of pure, untouched white. The snow lay in deep sculptural drifts, sparkling under the brilliant blue sky as if the ground were covered in diamonds. It was a new world, a clean slate. The time for departure had come. The air in the cabin was thick with the unsaid. Samuel knew he should be grateful, gather his children, and begin the arduous task of digging out his wagon and continuing his journey to Laramie. That had been the plan. That had been his promise. But his heart felt like lead. He watched as Lucy, weak but smiling, allowed Morningstar to braid a small, colorful bead into a lock of her hair. He saw Henry, his solemn little man, silently offer Onakona a piece of firewood for the hearth, a small gesture of respect that spoke volumes. His children were not just safe here. They were happy. They were at ease. He looked at Morningstar. She stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-draped plains, her profile serene and beautiful against the morning light. He thought of the life he was heading toward in Laramie, a rented room, the loneliness of a new town, the constant grinding struggle to be both father and mother to his children. He had been searching for a place to build a home, but what if home wasn't a structure of wood and nails? What if it was a feeling, the feeling of safety, of belonging, of family that he had found within these four walls? The promise he'd made to Mary wasn't about a specific town or a specific house. It was about giving their children a good life, a life of love and security. Laramie felt like a ghost town now. This cabin, this small patch of earth tended by this incredible woman and her wise grandfather. This felt like the most solid place in the entire world. He walked over to where she stood by the window. She turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes held a question. "The trail to Laramie will be clear soon," she said, her voice quiet. "I know," he replied, his own voice low. "My wagon, the wheel is broken. The axle too, most likely. It will take a blacksmith to fix it properly, but that's not what I'm worried about." He took a breath, his heart pounding in his chest like a carpenter's hammer. This was a greater risk than crossing the plains, than facing the storm. "Morningstar," he began, his voice thick with sincerity. "You said I have a gift with my hands. This cabin, it's strong, but the storm has taken its toll. I can see places where the roof needs mending, where the door frame could be strengthened before the next winter. I'm a carpenter. It's what I do. I would like to stay, to help, to repay you for what you've done for us. It's the only currency I have to offer." Her eyes searched his, looking for the truth behind his words. She saw it there, clear and honest. But she also saw something more, the deeper question he was truly asking. "Repayment is not necessary," she said softly. "The debt was to the storm and it has been paid." "This isn't about debt," he insisted, taking a half step closer. "Not anymore. This is about building. You and your grandfather have a home here. My children and we've been looking for one. Maybe we could build something new, together. I can fix your home and you've already begun to fix my family." The silence stretched between them, filled with the promise of a new dawn. Onakona watched them from his chair, a faint, knowing smile on his ancient face. Henry and Lucy had stopped their playing, sensing the importance of the moment. Finally, Morningstar's lips curved into a slow, beautiful smile that transformed her face, chasing away the last of the shadows. It was a smile that reached her eyes, filling them with a light as bright as the morning sun on the snow. She didn't give him a grand speech or a dramatic declaration. She simply nodded. One slow, deliberate nod. "There is much work to be done before the next snows," she said. "A good carpenter will be welcome here." And in those simple words, Samuel heard everything he needed to hear. He heard acceptance. He heard a future. He heard the sound of a door opening, not to a shelter from a storm, but to the home he had been searching for all along. True home isn't a place you build with wood and nails, but a connection you build with trust, kindness, and an open heart, a shelter often found in the most unexpected of storms. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to confirm your subscription and leave a like. It helps us a lot.